All right, for those of you under 40, I want to share with you a little bit about how TV commercials used to go down. So, there's a guy walking down the street in a business suit, real clean-cut guy, looks like Mr. Smith in one of the Matrix movies. You know, he's got a business suit on. He's got a briefcase in one hand, and he's eating a chocolate bar in the other hand. And then going down the street, around the corner, is some kid on a skateboard. He looks like, Sean Penn in Fast Times at Ridgemont High or something like that. He's got long hair. He's got on, long checkered shorts almost down, below his knees. He has on, a printed Hawaiian shirt, and he's listening to a Walkman, which is a cassette. For those of you, it's a cassette thing that I don't even know how to explain it to you, but it's a musical device that he's wearing, and he's got sunglasses on, and he's just very serenely riding his skateboard, swerving, in and out of all these people. He doesn't even see them, but he's just going back and forth, and he's got a big jar of peanut butter, and he's just eating the peanut butter with a spoon as he does this, and he's just, grooving out to whatever music he is, and he and the businessman arrive at the intersection at just the same time. And there's this big crash, and arms and limbs flying everywhere, and next thing you know, they're both sitting there next to each other on the ground, on their rear ends, and the businessman is holding half a chocolate bar now, and it's got a big glob of peanut butter on it, and the skater guy, he's holding his jar of peanut butter, and it's got a stick of chocolate in it, and they're both mad at each other, and they're like, this is terrible, you need to watch where you're going, and then, the man takes a bite of the chocolate bar with the peanut butter on it, and at the same time, the kid takes the chocolate out of the peanut butter, and he eats it, and at the same time, they're both like, hey, this is really good. And that's how Reese's peanut butter cups are born. And so that's kind of how it goes. But the point is that there's these two things that are not supposed to go together, or really don't seem like they would even begin to go together, but in fact, they're really great together. And we have been really kind of kicking around this idea here for the last few weeks, because for the last few weeks, we've been talking about the implications of grace in our spirituality and lives. And for example, 2 weeks ago, we talked about how the gospel is fundamentally about grace rather than performance. And we talked about the salt and light passage in Matthew chapter 5, and how salt and light are nouns, and they're not verbs, and they happen naturally as we immerse ourselves and invest ourselves in the kingdom of God. And then last week we talked about how the gospel is about grace rather than expectations, and all of the different things that we bring to the table. And we talked about how Jesus said that those who come to him need to come to him as little children, empty of themselves, completely dependent upon him. And so, children really don't have anything to offer. And how the kingdom is for the tired and the worn out and the bedraggled, who are seeking that yoke that is easy and that burden that is light. And again, such folks who are just tired and worn out really don't have a whole lot to offer. And then we talked about how it's for the bruised reeds and the smoldering wicks. The bruised reeds are, those flutes that just don't make music anymore. And the smoldering wicks are those that have that little spark, way down in there. But there's really not a whole lot to look at. Neither of these have very much to offer either. And we're saying that, these are wonderful pictures of God's grace. And how God does not want us to be driven by performance and expectation and legalism and all of these things. But the critiques of this are many. And the critiques of this approach. And for some, the implications of grace are scandalous. And that's why I started off with this entire series on grace by speaking on the scandal of grace for 4 weeks. So don't say I didn't warn you. But the critiques are that, this makes Christianity all about us and what we receive It leads to easy believism. It leads to consumer Christianity. It ignores the commands of Scripture, and it always downplays obedience. And I respond to that with two observations. The second one leading to really kind of the question of the day. And the first observation is that Jesus clearly taught and practiced love, grace, mercy, peace, acceptance, and forgiveness, while staunchly opposing all forms of legalism, self-righteousness, judgmentalism, exclusivity, and performance religion. And not only are such passages in the Scriptures, not only are such passages plentiful throughout the New Testament, I believe that I was faithful to the primary thrust and truth of these passages as I'm seeking to bring maybe a little bit of balance towards a Christianity that's currently tilting today towards legalism. Second observation is that Jesus' teachings on grace and acceptance lead to somewhat of an elephant in the room. And maybe we're tying a lot of different concepts together that we've talked about in the past here and, and trying to connect the dots a little bit. But we did talk about an elephant in the room, and that is why be good? If we can just be forgiven for stuff because of grace, then why, be good at all? Why don't we just go out and do whatever we want and then come back and ask for forgiveness? And this one's kind of like it. This elephant is kind of like that. And it is that the grace of Christ and the commands of Christ don't always seem consistent with one another. There's some apparent inconsistencies there. For example, if we are saved by grace with absolutely no strings attached, if there is nothing that we must do or even can do in order to be saved, if Christianity, as Jesus said, was about rest and peace rather than the external expectations of some religious system, if we are to be saved by grace and are to live by grace, then what about the commands of Christ? What about lordship? What about commitment? What about dying to self and carrying one's cross? What about the Great Commission? What about the kingdom? What about the billions of people on this planet who are lost and dying and going to hell? What about Matthew chapter 25 when Jesus said, I was hungry and you gave me something to eat. I was naked and you clothed me. And Scripture clearly calls us to a very high standard. And that is in the Scripture as well. And there are plenty of Scriptures like that as well. And the rally cry of new legalism is that if we do not measure up to these standards, if our lives do not meet these expectations, then we are terrible Christians. In fact, we may not even be Christian at all because we are lukewarm and Christ spews us out of his mouth. And so which is it? Is it grace or is it obedience? Is it chocolate or is it peanut butter? How do we bring these two together? Or how do we make that choice? How do we deal with that? And some people say, well, Gary, you're just creating a straw man argument. Because absolutely, we are to be saved by grace. Our salvation is by grace, but we prove our salvation with our deeds. And I would respond by saying, well, that's really a cop-out too. Because you're trying to have your cake and eat it too. Because if you're saying that there is no salvation unless it is proved by your deeds, then those deeds must be present for salvation to be present, ergo, salvation by works. I believe that these two ideas, grace and obedience, the chocolate and the peanut butter, these ideas can be reconciled through a biblical understanding of authentic spirituality and faith. And I believe that I can demonstrate very clearly through the Scriptures that authentic spirituality is about the inner life, or hearts transformed by the grace of Jesus towards the person and the character of Jesus Christ. And so as we encounter God, as we fall in love with Him, and as we continue to grow more and more and more in love with Him, it cannot but help impact our love towards other people, and how we treat other people, and how we interact with other people. The biblical term for this is righteousness, which means right relationships. But the idea is that it all starts in here. It starts with the inner life. It starts with that transformation. In 1 Samuel, we read, man looks at the outward appearance, but God looks at the heart. And I believe that spirituality as the inner life, or character and righteousness, is strongly supported by the central teachings and the key teachings of Jesus and the New Testament. With the Sermon on the Mount, the central message of Jesus, or the central teaching of Jesus. The Beatitudes that begin the Sermon on the Mount. The fruit of the Spirit, the great commandment, love God, love others. And it goes on and on, the one another's, etc. These core teachings of Jesus in the New Testament capture the tone, ethic, and substance of authentic spirituality, or what I would call Christ-likeness, because the whole idea of grace is that it is to lead us towards Christ-likeness. It is to lead us towards the person of Christ. And so if your spirituality doesn't lead you to look more like Jesus, then there's something wrong with your spirituality. If your spirituality does not lead you to be more about love and grace and mercy and peace and kindness and compassion, then there's something wrong with your spirituality. If your spirituality makes you a jerk, then there's something wrong with your spirituality. And something I've said before, and I'll say it again, that it is possible to know a lot about Christ and to do a lot for Christ, but not look very much like Christ. This is the theme and context of 1 Corinthians 13. The context is sandwiched between two chapters on spiritual gifts. And they're chapters on ministry. They're chapters on the external life, on service, and all of the things that we may need to be doing for God. And then in the middle of that, Paul calls us back and says, look, it doesn't mean anything unless it's done in the spirit of authentic spirituality. And let me tell you what that looks like. And so Paul writes, if I speak in the tongues of men and of angels but have not love, I am only a resounding gong or a clanging cymbal. If I have the gift of prophecy and can fathom all mysteries and all knowledge, and if I have a faith that can move mountains but have not love, I am nothing. If I give all I possess to the poor and surrender my bodies to the flame, but have not love, I gain nothing. It's a beautiful passage. And it's a beautifully written passage that goes really deep and strikes to the heart of some key issues. You see, Paul is juxtaposing love with the great deeds of faith. He's juxtaposing righteousness or right relationships or godly character or the inner life with all of those things that impress us as human beings, or what I would call the outer life. And so he's saying, if you are the greatest preacher in the world, man, if you fill stadiums with people eager to hear God's word and the gospel, and if you were admired and respected and even revered for your ability to communicate spiritual truth in amazing and interesting ways, and if you're able to lead thousands, no tens of thousands, no millions of people to Christ, and you have not love, then you yourself are without substance and are spiritually empty. And if you understand the deep things of God, If you have the greatest theological mind in the world, and your doctrine is so impeccable that you are the one person on this planet who is without error, who is flawless, and you understand all spiritual truth in exactly the same way that God does, but you are without love, the highest and most natural result of righteousness and holiness, then you are as insignificant can be. And if you have great faith as to accomplish great things for God, if your deeds move heaven and earth for the kingdom, you bring healing and peace to the nations, you lead the greatest missionary advance in the history of the world, and if you are without love, if it's not motivated by love, if it does not flow from love, then you are nothing before He who sees all and knows what is real and what is not real. And then he goes to the penultimate. If you give your very life, if you take everything you have and you sell it, you liquidate all your accounts and you give the money to the poor, or you go to a developing world and some country there and you live on less than $1 a day on some garbage heap so that you can identify with the people in order to share the gospel with them. And even if you give your life, you die in service to God and you gladly give your life, if it was not for love, then for you personally, it means nothing. You gain nothing. Again, it's possible to know a lot about Christ, do a lot for Christ, but not look very much like Christ. It is possible to do and be everything that impresses human beings and not impress God one bit. It is possible to be extremely committed and extremely sincere and miss the point entirely. For man looks at the outward appearance, but God looks at the heart. The point is that the outer life should flow from the inner life. And that the outer life is not an end in itself. Christ is the end. Christ is the goal. Christ's likeness is the measure. And Christ's likeness comes from a heart transformed by God's grace towards the person of Jesus Christ. And we are fundamentally changed by the grace that God has wrought within us. And as we become like Him, we relate to the world differently. We treat people differently. And what that looks like and the impact that we have is up to the Holy Spirit. You see, no human being it's impossible. No human being can create a list of boxes that people can check that would result in authentic spirituality. Because every single one of us we have our own passions, we have our own preferences, and so we're going to emphasize, whatever differences, we have. Well, for example, some people are really into worship. And for them, spirituality is all about how much you give yourself over to God in worship, how much you give your heart to God in worship. Some people, it's all about prayer, and their measure of spirituality is how much time a day you spend in fervent, sincere prayer before God. Some people really emphasize theology, and their measure of spirituality is understanding various nuances of Scripture and various doctrines in Scripture so that you can speak intelligently about God's revealed word and God's revealed will. And for some people, it's missions. And for some people, it's service. And for some people, it's sacrifice. And the thing is, they're all good things. And so maybe we are convicted about one of these things. And we begin to invest our life in that thing and to fully involve our lives and our hearts in whatever it is that is. And then someone else comes along with a different and scripturally equally valid measure of spirituality, and we find that we fail miserably. In other words, we cannot do it all. And to try to do it all is to fall into the performance trap where we're endlessly chasing validation and self-worth through the external expectations of religious systems or what is legalism. Now, the thing about legalism is we like to get down on legalism, and we like to really slam legalism, and I've really talked against it pretty hard here for the past couple of months, 2-3 months. But the truth is that we love legalism. Human beings prefer to relate to God in legalistic ways because we like things defined. We like things all spelled out. We're like, God, this spirituality thing is really hard. Why can't you just give us, 10 things that we're supposed to do, and then if we do them, we're good? Why can't we just have that? And God's like, we already tried that, and it didn't work. It led to legalism, it led to self-righteousness, it led to Phariseeism, and everything that ultimately killed my son when I sent him. But that's what we like. We like it defined. We like it neat. We like it clean. Authentic spirituality before God is messy. Let me give you some for instances of what I'm talking about. A pastor in Southern California named Larry Osborne wrote a book a couple of years ago called Accidental Pharisees. And in his book, he identified 5 modern movements within the evangelical community, 5 different religious systems by which people measure their spirituality. Measure spirituality in their lives and in the lives of other people. And the thing about these movements, and I'll preface by saying this, is they're all good things. I resonate with most of these. I have self-identified with some of these at different times. But just to give you an illustration of what I'm talking about and how we do this, I would just like to read his description of these movements. The first group that he identifies are what he calls radical Christians. He writes, radical Christians tend to see generosity as the leading indicator of what it means to follow Jesus. The required metric is a generous and simple lifestyle, with the caveat that if you don't live simply enough, you aren't generous enough. A luxury car in the driveway or an expensive house is to a radical what a cold beer in the refrigerator is to an old school legalist. And then he talks about crazy Christians. He writes, the second group of highly committed Christians include people who see themselves as crazy in love with Jesus. Their litmus test of a true disciple is costly personal sacrifices, financial or otherwise. Evidence that you've been persecuted for your faith is highly valued. So are wild leaps of faith that all of your friends thought were nutso. And then he talks about missional Christians. He writes, a third group of highly committed Christians have adopted the label missional. They want to know what you're doing to help fulfill the mission of God. If you start up a soup kitchen, volunteer to tutor at-risk kids, or move your family from the suburbs to the inner city, you have no problem earning this badge. The fourth group he identifies are gospel-centered Christians. He writes, a fourth group of highly committed Christians are people who choose the moniker gospel-centered. They like to determine spiritual maturity by means of their theological grid. If you like big words, careful distinctions, and nuanced debates, you'll fit right in. It also helps if you read something by Jonathan Edwards recently. To pass their litmus test, you'll want to use lots of Bible verses, avoid the word pragmatic, and tie everything to the gospel. And then finally, he talks about revolutionary and organic Christians. He writes, finally, there are people who like to think of themselves as revolutionary or organic. If you've been deeply hurt or disillusioned by the failings of the large church or any institutional expression of the church, you are a likely candidate. It is a prerequisite to be keenly aware of the flaws of the established church. That said, to be fully accepted, you'll have to start attending a house church. I personally find merit in all of these. They all make good points. They all have something to say. They all represent important voices within the larger Christian community, but they are all lacking and incomplete when it comes to a comprehensive spiritual ethic. Must all Christians really be poor? That's what one of these in particular advocates. Is it really a sin to be rich? Must all Christians suffer? Is there anything wrong with what Paul was talking about in the scripture when he talks about living a peaceful and quiet life? Is there something wrong with that? Must all Christians be international missionaries? Like everyone? Must all Christians have complete theological conformity? Must all Christians worship in exactly the same way? Is that important? And is it really that easy? Or does each Christian bear responsibility to work out his or her faith and the expression of his or her faith under the leadership of the Holy Spirit? You see, 1 Corinthians 13 asks different questions. It doesn't ask if you're a teacher or a theologian or a missionary. It doesn't ask how sacrificial you are or how much impact you've had. It asks if you love. And in case you didn't get it, in case you don't really understand what Paul means by that when he says, if I speak in the tongues of men and of angels, but have not love, I am only a resounding gong or a clanging cymbal. So you read through that and you think, well, I don't know what he means by love. Well, then Paul says, in case you didn't get it, I'm going to explain it to you in verses 4 through 7. As he adds to the ethic. Look at the text. Does the grace in your life, does God's working in your life make you more patient? Does God's working in your life, the grace that you have received, the love that you have received, the salvation that you have received, does that make you more kind and understanding and compassionate and selfless? Do you genuinely seek the best for others, or are you looking out for number one? Are you acting in envy or jealousy? Are you rude or proud or boastful? Are you self-seeking, making everything about you? Are you angry and bitter and resentful? Because love always seeks what is good. Love seeks the highest. Love seeks truth. This is what it means to be like Christ. This is what authentic spirituality looks like. Righteousness and holiness, relationships and character. And if this is who we are, if we are like Christ, then the Holy Spirit will worry about the impact. He'll take care of that. But for us, the goal, the end game, is Christ's likeness. How that finds expression in your life is up to the Holy Spirit. You are responsible for working out your faith in all honesty and humility in your relationship with God. You trust in His leading, you trust in His gifting, and you trust in the heart or the passion that He has given you. I mean, if I give my life to pursue missions, does that really make me a better Christian than the person who gives their life to pursue prayer or theology? Or if I give all of my money to the poor, does that really make me a better Christian than the one who serves the poor out of his or her abundance? Or if I attend a house church, does that really make me a better Christian than a person who attends a regular church? You see what I mean? When I say that you are responsible to work out your spirituality, your faith, who God wants you to be, how Christ's likeness finds expression in your life, in this world, in your community, in your relationship with God. Because we can't do it all. The externals, I mean. No one can live up to everybody's expectation of what it means to be a Christian. But none of that matters anyway, because the expectation that the New Testament holds up, the expectation that Jesus holds up, is not any of those external things necessarily. What he holds up is Christ's likeness. Who you are becoming. Are you like Christ? Are you moving towards the character and the person of Christ? Is God's grace changing your heart, or what I mean when I say the inner life? And this is why it is such an imperative for us to approach our faith with grace and faith. We live by grace and faith because it's hard. It's not as easy as just checking a bunch of boxes and saying, okay, I've done all the steps. Bam, I'm there. I'm it. I am the Christian. I am super Christian because I have checked the boxes. And the Scripture lays out an entirely different approach. And here's the cool thing about it all to me. And we've kind of talked around the whole thing because, we're looking for that key to help us understand, how do we do this? How do we reconcile the chocolate and the peanut butter? What's the answer to that? And again, Paul hit it right on the head in 1 Corinthians 13. The key is love. Love is that which ties the two together, that ties obedience and grace together. Have you ever noticed that when Jesus speaks about obedience, he always speaks about love, and when he speaks about love, he always speaks about obedience? Master, of course, they were trying to trick him, those who said master in that one. Which is the greatest commandment? What do we have to do to be obedient? What's our duty? Give us the boxes to check, Lord. Love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength. Oh, I'll give you another one, free of charge. Second is like it. Love your neighbor as yourself. And if you do that, if you do those things, then you will have fulfilled all the law and the commandments. You will be obedient if you do that. And so he defines obedience in terms of love. And how many times, especially in the book of John, it's like 5 or 6 times in the book of John, he says, if you love me, you will obey my commands. And so once again, instead of defining obedience in terms of love, now he's defining love in terms of obedience. And what we see is there's this incredible corollary there that happens, this dynamic that happens as we immerse ourselves in the love of Jesus Christ, as we immerse ourselves in his grace and we grow in him, we begin to see that his love is the most amazing, incredible thing that there possibly is. And it causes us to soar in such incredible heights, and we don't even think about it. Oh, Lord, you want me to do this over here? Yeah, I'm there. I'm your man. I'm going to be obedient to you because I know that you love me and you desire good for me and you desire to take me to these incredible places. It's not a duty at all. It's not a command at all. Yes, I'm being obedient because I know it leads to life. And so Jesus always ties love and obedience together because in Christ, his commands are not onerous. They're not hard. Remember what he said? My yoke is easy and my burden is light. Does that mean that he doesn't have any commands? No, he knows good and well. He has lots of commands. He's the same person who said that any who would come after me must deny himself and take up his cross. He's talking about complete self-denial. He's talking about complete surrender. So he knows full well what he's talking about, but what he's saying is that in Christ and under me, and the things that I'm asking you to do are wonderful things that lead to goodness and life. And so we don't even see him as a duty in that way that we think of duty. We don't even see them as checking a bunch of boxes, because that's not what we're about anyway. And so what happens is, how this works is that as we grow in Christ, as we grow in the grace of Christ, and he's working in our hearts, and he's changing us, and that transformation is taking place, and we desire more and more of him, we come to that place where we can say with the psalmist, that his word, that his precepts, that his commands are like honey to our lips. Where his law is wonderful, and it's good, and we embrace it and we take it in. It is our delight. And so, is it obedience or is it grace? Well, if you're thinking in terms of the boxes, you'll never bring them together. You'll never be able to reconcile those. But if you think of it in terms of relationships or righteousness, and you think of it in terms of love, and growing in relationship with him as he grows you through the inner life, the two just naturally come together to make something wonderful, to make something beautiful, to make something fruitful, to make something that you can never otherwise do on your own. As God elevates us, he elevates our hearts as we begin to live in him and his kingdom, and we begin to live according to his ways. And he guides our steps, and we allow him to do so gladly, because he leads us to places of life. And so that question is moot, and there's this huge argument within the Christian community today. One half of the people accusing everybody else of being legalistic, and then they're accusing, everybody else of easy believism. And we just sit here and we bicker among ourselves, when the truth is that's just such a base level, that as we begin to grow in Christ and experience in him and his love, that question just fades away, and it's just, yes, Lord. Yes. I want you because I want your love, and because I want your guidance, and I want you to direct my paths in the ways of life.